Alright, today we're going to install the Chargepoint Homeflex on this wall right behind me. We're going to go over the hardwire installation, certain parts that you're going to need, and some of the advantages that you're going to get from doing it this way as opposed to plugging it into your wall. Here's a look at all the parts we're going to need and a look at the Chargepoint Homeflex. You can snap off the faceplate, cover plate. Next comes the wire cover. The plug is connected via these 3 terminals. So you're going to want to pry these off. So that you can go ahead and run your hardwire installation. Now, important to note is when you look on your faceplate, you're going to see these 2 screw holes. These are not provided by Chargepoint. What you can do is go to the hardware store and ask for 632 3/8 inch long. Chargepoint says that they're not needed for the integrity of the charger, so they just didn't supply it. It costed about 2 cents. We've got a drill bit, we've got a driver, 3 lag screws. Your charging cable is going to go into this port here. And for the hardwire installation, you have 2 options. You can access this via the back through the wall, or you can stay on the outside and enter through where the plug originally came into. If you go through the wall, you can actually tap out this cover plate and put it right here. For what I'm doing, I am going to go on the outside because I don't want to drill through the brick. If I did, I would have to have the same size hole go through the brick and then run conduit through it, and then from there I would have to mount the charger. It would be okay if it was never gonna move, but if I ever moved or replaced this, you would have that large of a hole in the brick that you'd have to fill up. So instead, I'm going to use the flexible conduit with these joints. They're going to made up like such. And then it's actually going to run through the soffit down on the outside, and there's only going to be a handful of small penetrations in the brick. Okay, the conduit that I went with is flexible. This costed me $28. The elbow joint was $3. The straight joint was $1.50. Clamps were $1.50. Concrete anchors were $5, and the circular bit to go into the soffit was only $15. Yeah, a couple of reasons why I'm not going through the brick and I'm going with the flexible conduit is if I needed to move over the charging station with the flexible conduit, it's just a matter of undoing a couple screws, relocating the box, and then tightening it back down. If you went with EMT or if you went with PVC, you would essentially have to redo the build from scratch. Okay, because that requires bending, cutting just to where you want it, where with the flexible conduit that I have, it's just a matter of rerouting it and flexing it as needed. This is the sub panel in our garage. As you can see, there is not enough room for a 240 volt breaker for the charger, and I've seen a lot of videos use the sub panel. Now, they may have had enough room and they could have supported the load possibly, but that was not the case with me. an electrician stopped by and he told me that I could double up on one of these breakers. You can get one that's the same size that has 2 breakers on it and just slide everything up. Okay, however, the problem is that this whole panel is only rated at 80 amps. The breaker for our charger is going to be rated at 60 amps. So it's only leaving 20 amps for the rest of these breakers. And as you can see here, we have the dryer, we have the water heater, so it's very possible that if you're charging in the middle of the night, if you're using these items, this panel can pop from the main breaker circuit panel that feeds this, and you can lose power to your entire house until you go back outside and reset it. This is the main panel that feeds my house. This is the 80 amp circuit breaker that feeds the sub panel in my garage. So it wouldn't make sense to have a 60 amp breaker on my sub panel that's only rated at 80 amps before it pops. So right here is going to be a 60 amp breaker that's going to be hardwired direct to the charger. An electrician is going to come in, he's going to tap in here. He's going to route conduit all the way up into the soffit and then run the cabling all the way across the house direct into the charger. Unless you have a lot of experience with electrical work, my recommendation is just go ahead and go with an electrician. I have an electronics background, but I just don't deal with panels that often. So it's just a one-time cost. You can have someone that's a professional install this correctly. Okay, you can sleep well at night, know that you're not breaking any type of code rules and whatnot. So just go ahead and pay the one-time fee to have them do this if you're not entirely comfortable. If I did enough research, I could probably do this myself and it'd be perfectly fine. But this electrician actually came up with this suggestion to me, so it was just the right thing to do to go ahead and give him my business, since I would have probably routed it directly to the sub panel, and then I would have probably had some issues in the future. Okay, so it's your decision, but my recommendation is go with the professional if you're not comfortable with this work. Another thing is you guys are probably wondering, hey, why 60 amps versus 70 or 80? This is another thing that my electrician told me. He's like, hey, 6 gauge wire is rated for 50 amps, so 6 AWG. Now, the highest breaker you can have for 6 gauge wire is 60 amps. If you were to go 70, 80, you actually have to go with 4 gauge wire, and that's just not practical for houses, for the residential type setup. He says it's possible, but the cable is a lot thicker, it's more expensive, and it's just simply harder to manipulate. So instead of running at 50 amps hardwired like they advertise, once this is done, it's going to be ran at 48 amps to stay within code. And the way that you do that is in the app, you actually select what size circuit breaker you're using for your Chargepoint system. Alright, here is the installed Chargepoint Homeflex. Exterior hardwire mounted. I went off of the edge of the house as much as I could so that I could reach back out into the driveway if I couldn't pull straight up to the charger. Now, a couple of things that didn't happen were I did not use the joint up top. It sounded good when I was at the hardware store, but it was just way too difficult to reach all the way in there and tighten up the coupling on the opposite side of that soffit. If you look here, my electrician, he went ahead and provided some screws because the ones that I had from the hardware store, these you do not want to use, okay? Because you're required to put a lot of torque onto these heads to get them through the brick, and the problem is that a Phillips head is just not going to do it. Okay, if you notice these screws here, you can actually put a driver for like a nut on there, or a bolt. Okay, semantics aside. I do like the look. The flexible conduit, to me it looks a lot cleaner. It looks a lot more modern, better than PVC pipe and EMT. And then right here at the very end, I put a little tiny dip so that any water that runs down this tube will drip off right there, as opposed to being pushed into the bottom of the charge point. Alright, there's the conduit he ran into the soffit. And there's the breaker. I'm going to fix all this with a label maker. I just don't like how it's just inked in like that everywhere. But yeah, there's the EV charger, and there's the 60 amp breaker. Alright, final thoughts on the install. Definitely glad that I got the electrician to do the hard wiring. He actually went out of his way to help me do this. He actually did all that, and when he gave me a quote, I told him just leave the wire there and I'll do it myself. Good dude. Did all that, provided a couple of bits, screws and stuff like that. Didn't even charge me extra. He said don't worry about it. Okay, so definitely I would recommend using an electrician unless you are professional yourself. They just make it look a little bit cleaner. They have the extra tools that you may not have just to make things go a lot easier. Okay, so that's it. The hardwire installation. So now I'll be able to pull 48 amps. I can actually change the setting to 50 on the app, and it will essentially still work at 50 amps, and it'll just draw a little bit more current and run a little bit more warmer than what the code calls for. Okay, so it'll still work. You're just going out of the tolerances for what the code is, the NEC code or whatnot. A lot of things come into play. That's where the professional electricians come in. Do yourself a favor, get the little screws that we talked about earlier. They're going to seal it up, make it nice and solid. You're not going to accidentally pull off the plate. It's just a lot better in the long run. Hey, I hope this helped you guys out. If you guys are looking to do a EV level 2 install at your house, externally, just another way to do it. Yeah, leave me your comments, any questions, and hit that like and subscribe button. I'll see you guys next time.